So we have another exciting panel. It's customer acquisition, B2B. And I've admired a lot of these entrepreneurs for a while. I've known a lot of them for a long time. And I actually think this is the best dressed panel that we're going to see today. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Eric Severinghaus from Spring CM, Jeff Ellman, Urban Bound and Hierology, Kevin Kent, Review Trackers, and Christy Zolke from Knowledge Hound. So welcome, everyone. So we were kidding about opening up with an icebreaker, and people had mentioned doing and saying a joke. I think 70% or 90% of most moderated panels start off with a joke, and I'm not very funny, so we're not going to do that. But we are going to start off with your favorite spirit animal. No, I'm kidding. So if you could, work with me here. If you guys could, start off by just telling us your name and a little bit about your company and what it is that you guys do.
Sure. I'm Eric Severinghaus. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Spring CM. So Spring is one of, I think, probably the best kept secrets in the Chicago technology ecosystem. We're a document management and workflow automation company, so we work with a lot of B2B companies, primarily mid-size and enterprise, really helping them transform the way that they do workflow. So our biggest use case is contract lifecycle management, essentially helping customers get contracts through their processes faster, which ultimately speeds the revenue cycle for our clients.
Great. Jeff?
My name is Jeff Ellman. I'm one of the co-founders of Urban Bound and Hierology. Basically, I wanted to solve the problem of people. People is the #1 expense at companies. So the two companies I started go back to my days in HR consulting and recruiting. Hierology, I learned that most companies lack a structured hiring process. They're typically winging it when interviewing a lot of candidates. So we built a data-driven piece of software that allows you as the interviewer to ask questions and the answers predict success. Also, Urban Bound, background in HR, learned that most companies, when they relocate employees, typically just give them a large lump sum of money and wish them good luck with their move to whatever city they're moving to. So we built software that allows the employee to have a much better experience by connecting to suppliers along the way, learning more about their city, and then managing their money appropriately.
Hi, I'm Kevin Kent with Review Trackers. I'm the COO. We help location-based businesses monitor and manage their online reviews. So the best way to explain that is an example. Subaru, one of our customers, they have about 600 dealerships, but they end up with 4,000 profiles on the various review sites. So our software aggregates everything into a central dashboard, gives them analytics around it, helps them better understand their customers and their customer experience.
Hi, I'm Christy Zolke. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Knowledge Hound. The simplest way to think about us is that we're the Google for market research inside of large organizations. So we go into a company, we ingest all of their market research data, we layer on top a search engine, a visualization tool, and they can go in and search things like, what % of men wear ties? And if they have the data, we visualize it on the fly and they can make a decision instantly.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. So this panel is about customer acquisition, so let's talk a little about your customers. But I always think it's fun to start maybe with a story. So if you could, tell us a story about maybe your first customer or a success story that sticks out. If Jeff, if you want to start us off, we'll mix up the order here.
Sure. So actually, I'll share a story that most of my employees don't even know. This is how Hierology was started. Hierology was started in 2010, but it actually goes back to 2002. I had just moved to Chicago from Detroit and really wanted to do business with a local accounting firm, and the managing director wouldn't give me the time of day to meet, but he did give me a quick phone call, and during that phone call I learned that his wife would not let him eat Pizzeria Due. That was his favorite pizza, and he was not allowed to eat it because of his health. Fast forward a few years, he finally gave me the opportunity to meet, and what I learned is that people do business with people they like, and they tend to like people like themselves. That was now my favorite pizza. So I showed up at a lunch meeting and with Pizzeria Due in hand, gave it to the hostess, asked her to bring this out for dessert with this gentleman, Dan. When she brought out the pizza, he said, "How do you know this is my favorite?" I said, "You told me 2 years ago." And he said, "You listened to me, you've won my business." And that ended up being a multi-million-dollar contract that I took those funds from that contract and started the seed fund for Hierology with.
That's pretty solid. So,
Yeah, are we supposed to one-up that story?
why'd you start there? Yeah, definitely not. The one that sticks out for me the most was relatively early on. It was actually Chris and myself in about a 10 by 10 office where we negotiated for the office furniture with the current landlord by giving her 2 cases of Heineken, and that's not a joke at all. That's what she wanted, and. But it was relatively early on. We were working on mostly small deals, and we had a pretty sizable opportunity with a healthcare organization. And after a few months of conversation, we were able to win the deal. And the kicker and what really stands out in my mind is they paid for the first year up front, sent us a pretty sizable check that we were used to. It was probably 10x what we had gotten in the past. And it really resonated, one, because everyone likes getting a really big check, but then also justified some of what we were doing and aiming towards to really solidify our mindset around, are we solving a real problem for people? Are we really adding value to their organization? And the fact that they were not only willing to sign up with a relatively small organization or tiny organization, that they were willing to do so for a year and pay up front. So that was phenomenal for us.
So I didn't bribe anyone with pizza or beer, but I went. I should have probably, but I went back. I started my career at Procter & Gamble, and after 2 years after I'd left, created a company, sold that, and I'd finally waited out my 2 years where I could actually go back and work with P&G again. And I created Knowledge Hound. It looked like it worked, but actually didn't work. And I went in, and I actually had never worked with this woman before. And so we kind of knew each other. It was that like warm introduction. And walked into her office, and I knew their physical year ended July 1. So, and this was, I think, April timing. And so she's probably looking to spend money because they always want to dump cash, spend it if they haven't spent it, so they make sure they get it again the next year. And so I show her Knowledge Hound, and she goes, "This is amazing." She's like, "How much does this cost?" And I was like, "How much do you have?" She's like, "Well," and she pulls up her spreadsheet, and she looks through her budget, and she's like, "I have $40,000. And I was like, "That's how much it costs."
What a coincidence.
And I walked out with a PO. So that was my...
That's a great story. Eric?
Yeah, none of mine are nearly as humorous. I'm trying to think
We
of
need to get a pizza story. Like,
yeah. The pizza stories come with Papa John's. That was a different thing. So what's interesting about Spring CM is you can almost think of us as like a GUI-based programming language in the cloud. And so there's all kinds of different things that you can do with our platform. And one of the things that I really love doing is getting out to our clients and understanding why the hell they actually use us and why they write us a check. And so Facebook is one of our clients, and Facebook initially bought us for what is kind of a traditional use case for us around managing contracts. And we were out there visiting them, and we literally walked into this room, and they said, "Hey, we want to show you something. This is kind of cool." So we said, "All right, what's that?" So we walk into this room, and this room is like floor to ceiling with legit file cabinets filled with like dead trees, like paper, everywhere at Facebook, right? And so I'm like, what the hell is Facebook doing with all of these physical pieces of paper everywhere? And so they said they had one of their junior guys build a workflow within Spring where they were now processing all of their intern as you guys may know, like Facebook interns oftentimes make more money than like your average FTE, right? And they were hiring so many of these and trying to bring them on at such a rapid pace that they literally did not have a process. That process involved tons of paper, and it was a huge pain in the butt. And so they said all of these paper documents are literally all going away. They're being archived in the platform. And we now all of a sudden are using Spring to optimize and to automate that entire workflow around processing intern paperwork. And so it was one of these really neat epiphanies, like, maybe we actually have a use case around the way people use us for HR management. And so every time I go out and meet clients, and this is one of the reasons I love getting close to these enterprise clients, is you end up finding these use cases oftentimes where they're using your platform for stuff that you didn't even know that it could be used for.
That's great. And actually, you mentioned Facebook is one of your clients. When you're thinking about your clients, you're thinking about your customers. If you can share with the audience, who are your clients, and how do you segment them or think about them when you're kind of going after them?
Yeah, so the way that we segment, we are following a very similar trajectory. There's a lot in our DNA that sort of aligns with Salesforce. And so if you look at the way Salesforce.com sort of segments its customers, they have a mid-market set and essentially an enterprise set. And we think of our customers very much the same way. For a long time, Spring has been in the just go get customers, and we are now starting to be a lot more evolved around go-to-market plays for specific industries, for specific geographies, and really getting smarter around the way that we target. We've now mined our CRM data to find our top 10 SIC codes, using those SIC codes to start to operationalize, hey, let's fish in the ponds that we think that we're most likely to win. So right now it's a broad-based solution, but we are starting to target industries more and more where we have enough data that we're highly confident that that's going to lead to higher close rates for us.
Jeff?
Let's say finding the target market is one of the most difficult things to do, and identifying who's the persona you're targeting, what's the ideal customer profile. At Hireology, we were not off to the fastest start the first year in the business, and what we quickly learned was there was riches and niches. When it came to companies that were decentralized, that lacked a structured hiring process, we found the automotive industry was fantastic. We had dealerships that had 12 to 15 to 20 rooftops, and everyone was doing hiring a different way. As soon as we found that path and really focused hard on it, that led to a lot of the success in the early days of Hireology. With Urbanbound, what we learned was that I call them the dazed and confused customers or clients, and then you have the market leaders. The market leaders, our clients are like Intel and Pepsi and Marriott Hotels. They already have figured out how they want to relocate employees. They're looking for us to come in and really support it, supplement it, and add more value to the experience leveraging software. But the dazed and confused clients, like the Dollar Shave Clubs, the HubSpots, these are companies where the HR teams, they don't understand how to relocate their employees. It's typically a hot potato that no one's solving that problem. So when we come in there and land them as a client, it's a very, very strong relationship because we're solving problems from CEO all the way down to intern. So we learned our target market actually at Urbanbound is not the Fortune 500. When we first started off the company, I was probably obsessed with the big logos. You land an AT&T or a GE Healthcare and you come home, you feel great about yourself. But when you actually look at the average revenue per customer, a lot of times it's going to be in the middle market, and they're a lot easier to acquire as well.
For us, probably similar to a lot of companies, when you're really starting out, you take what you can get. You're going to close and accept any revenue possible and be really ecstatic about it. Over time, that grows. You're able to identify different segments that work better for you, where you can have the best conversation, where your product really resonates. So for us, across the board, it's location-based businesses, but it really ranges from single location Joe's Pizza to U.S. Bank, who has 3,000 plus locations. We segment by industry on the sales side, just so they can keep those specific conversations going and use the jargon that's applicable to that industry or vertical. It is usually a very nuanced or small difference in that language because you're really saying the same thing, but talking about customer on one end or patient on the other, if we're working in healthcare, makes a significant difference, and that's their expectation. So we've kept everything segmented by vertical, and then the other direction we segment is by size. So similar to the mid-market and enterprise roles, we have AEs that specialize in those smaller mid-market deals, and then enterprise execs that focus on the larger opportunities.
Yeah, I'd say ours is actually really similar, which I'm surprised to hear because when I was starting out the company, investors would ask, how are you going to segment the market? And they'd be like, by geography, right? And I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. We'd have a sales rep in New York, and they would call on all those people, and then one on the West Coast, and it seemed to be like that's how people were segmenting their markets, or that's what our VCs were telling us, at least. And what we figured out was that it actually was much more like you guys at Review Trackers, where you could, when you can speak the same language as the people in those industries, it's really, really helpful. And we found that when you can find a case study at an insurance company and then go sell that and to take that case study to 5 more insurance companies, the sale happens a lot faster. And so we also segment by industry, and we call mostly on the Fortune 1000. We went big at first because we thought actually the problem existed mostly among the Fortune 500, and we luckily found out that the problem existed among anyone doing market research. We also started with CPG because that's just my background, and so that's where my contacts were, which a warm introduction really, really helps inside these organizations. But as we've started to mature, we've also found that CPG and like these big behemoth companies are so freaking slow, and they're just, I actually think they're going to become, most of them will become obsolete in the next 30 years, which I know is a very aggressive statement, but just seeing how they're so slow, It's incredible. So we actually started targeting companies like Lyft and Samsung. Even though it's a really big company, they've segmented actually pretty locally. So the smaller the Fortune 1000 company, the better, because they can be more agile, and also the more forward thinking in tech, they can move a little bit faster. So we've been in a procurement process with an insurance company for 7 months, and we received 1 red line back. 7 months. And I was like, did we lose the deal? Like, what's going on? And I called up their VP, and I forced myself into her office. I was like, just tell me no. Just break up with me, because I am like spending time thinking about this, and I'm forecasting it. And she was like, oh no, nothing's wrong. That's just our procurement process. And we're like, I mean, it's not yet even a 6-figure deal. We're talking about, you know, a nice little 5-figure deal. And it's just like, it's crazy. So I think that's actually something how we've adjusted to who we're targeting is based on their ability to go faster.
Can I add one thing to
Yeah,
that point?
please.
So have you guys read Crossing the Chasm? Anybody? Show of hands, a few people. All right. If you were doing technology marketing, I would strongly recommend, if you're trying to take a new product to market, do not stop whatever you're doing, read Crossing the Chasm first by Jeffrey Moore, and then go back to whatever you're doing and realize that you're going to have an entirely different shift in mentality in terms of how you segment the market and how you take it to market. Going back to Christy's point, the key thing that Moore posits in this book, which I think is utterly brilliant, is that the key thing to getting the deal done is referenceability. And so whether that's referenceability by somebody you know in the geography who can tell you that the product is awesome, whether it's referenceability from somebody that they respect in the industry, ultimately, in order to get any sort of meaningful market adoption, it comes down to that referenceability, and he's got a phenomenal blueprint for how to think about segmenting and attacking that market.
And I think FOMO, I play into that so often, that fear of missing out. So I do I'm our VP of sales right now, which is very scary, but you know, when you're in a startup as early as we are, you're VP of everything. And I'll send cold LinkedIn messages, and I'll be like, hey, I was just talking to Lyft the other day. I sent one to the VP of Insights at Uber the other day. I was like, hey, I was talking to Lyft the other day. Things are going great on their deal. Thought you might want to chat. What do you know? He wants to chat next week. So, you know, that FOMO, you just play into that, and it's amazing when you can target those verticals, what can happen.
One of the things with talking about being a great reference, most large companies will not allow you to use their logo. You're going to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And it's going to kill you because you want to use that logo to acquire more customers. However, if you actually push back a little bit and say, I'm fine not using your logo, I won't use it in the press, I won't use it in my slide presentations, but I do ask that you do a case study with us after we prove success, and we're going to share with other companies just via email. We're not going to mass blast it to anybody. Those case studies, I might hire a junior salesperson with 2 months of experience, and he or she could close a 6-figure deal because we really eliminated the risk for the buyer to make the decision to say yes to our company. So case studies are critical.
Has anybody ever gotten sued? Anybody here ever gotten sued for using a logo for somebody that told you not to use a logo, though? Anybody in the entire room? I have never in my entire life heard of anybody ever getting sued for telling somebody that somebody's a client when they were told not to disclose that.
But we're all scared. We're scared of doing it.
For early stage companies, I would argue that your risk of not acquiring the client is far greater than your risk of getting sued by your current client because you tell somebody else that they're a client. Something to think about.
That's absolutely true. I mean, early on, you just want the referenceability. You want to show them that they're not the first person taking the leap, that you have that credibility, that you've had success. And we've run into the same situation where you can't use our logo officially, but in conversation and when your sales team is pitching to people, you can reference it and send them documentation. So just because someone says no or they're a much larger organization and they might have a lot of legal rules around or their thoughts around what you can and can't do, there's usually a back door or something you can maneuver to still make that referenceability and get it into where you really want it to be, which is your next prospect's hands and them see that you've had success.
Here's the secret. That's their legal person. Their business people don't give a shit. They don't care.
No, that was great. That was great insight, man. I'm gonna let you do your thing, my friend.
It blows me away all the time. CEOs are so scared to talk about their clients because they're so terrified of giving that away, and they end up shooting themselves in the foot over something that nobody cares about.
Yeah, that's not practical.
So true.
So, shifting gears and talking about sales cycle, right? Obviously, it's a big component. Anything unique that you guys, your customers did that had you pivot your business or the way that you sell to your customers? Jeff, you want to start us off?
Sure. So what I learned is that typically in the selling cycle, there's multiple buyers, but there's one person with the pen. But trying to get the right message to the person with the pen is difficult to do in a large organization. So how do you control your messaging? Because you sell to one person who becomes your internal champion, who's going to work it up the ladder and eventually tell the story. What I found was by the time it got to the person with the pen, the story of my companies was completely different than what I actually educated them on in the beginning of the process. So controlling messaging, making sure that, meeting customers face-to-face, I think is critical to do in a larger enterprise type of deal with a 6 figures potential. But making sure that anyone who's looking at your company is able to basically have access to all the right information at any given time when it comes to larger companies.
And real quick, what's your sales cycle time in terms of
So for middle market, it's about 4 to 6 months. Okay. Enterprise, we're looking at about a year.
Okay.
Sales cycle, we're about the same timeline, but one suggestion I would make to everyone is to make sure you get the information that's going to be needed at various levels out there so they have that. So the information you might be talking or passing on as a user is going to be very different from what they care about to what the person with the pen actually cares about. So the user is going to want usability and make sure it's going to make their life easier, their job easier. But the person actually signing the check is going to care about ROI and some more numbers-based things. So make sure you include both of those or have different tracks to get the right information to the right people.
For us, we're selling to the market research or the insight organization inside these large companies. So they're used to purchasing market research, not software. And so we've had to do a lot of educating them on how to purchase us. We've gotten a lot smarter on that. So when we go into a phone call, we always ask, whose budget would this come out of? And who's the decision maker, which is what you guys were getting at. But then a lot of times they'll be like, oh, well, I'm not sure. And so then we tell them who their decision maker is. And we've probably already found that person on LinkedIn. And we try to get IT to stay as far away as possible because they're typically not helpful at all. And when they start to go, oh, I think I need to get IT involved, we can manage that conversation and say, yes, you do, but that's on a security check. And that usually you have to do those at a certain contract level. So once we get there, we are happy to have that conversation with IT, but let's first get this decision maker in the room. Our average time that it takes to close a deal is about 9 months. And what I found out is that actually, for the really big deals, if we're doing a deal that's $75K versus $300K, it's the same 9 months. So we might as well go big at the beginning because it doesn't make the sales cycle faster between that delta. But what we are trying right now is actually a nice little 10K deal that can just get us in the door. We don't have to go through procurement at all. And we're hoping that's actually going to speed up our sales cycle because right now the MSA negotiation takes a long time. And I'm the type of person I'm like, yeah, just sign it, it's fine. And our head of operations is like, no, they're going to own your IP, they're going to own all of this, and this. And so you do actually have to negotiate those MSAs, and that just takes a really long time and something I didn't factor in when thinking about when we have a deal in our pipeline, how long that actually takes.
The thing that I see absolutely kill sales cycles for early stage companies is everybody sits around trying to figure out how to come up with all these little tricks to try to make the sales cycle move faster for a deal that shouldn't be in the pipeline anyway. Because we don't have enough pipeline, so we're scared to death to qualify anything out. And so we end up burning all of these cycles on these shit deals that are gonna drag for a year or two because they haven't effectively been qualified. And so one of the things that we've started to do at Spring that I love is for every deal that we're going to be serious about, taking it and forcing the rep to come back and be able to articulately explain, is it real? Can we win it? And is it worth it? And when we think about that, is it real? A lot of times we actually try to go in and essentially negatively qualify the customer. If we say, hey, Mr. Customer, like this sounds interesting, but it doesn't sound like you've got budget, and it doesn't sound like you're gonna do anything this year. So let's keep in touch, let's be friends, but we'll call you back in 6 months, right? Do they grab you as you're walking out the door and say, no, we need this. We have a real problem here. This is this is hard. Or do they say, yeah, that sounds good, call us back in 6 months? Because chances are, if it's the latter, no matter, or if it's the former, if they don't really care that you're walking out the door, then no matter what tricks you try and do to qualify, or you try and do to accelerate the deal, that kind of thing, you're ultimately never going to be able to accelerate an unqualified deal. And what you end up doing is spending lots and lots and lots of cycles trying to figure out why they won't call you back, why you can't get this thing to move, when ultimately you shouldn't be chasing that anyway. You should be spending those precious limited resources going and finding the next one.
So we only have limited time in terms of like, no, not here. I'm just saying when we're, the sales cycle, right?
You're telling me I was going on too long.
By the way,
Shut up, Eric.
We're done here. No. In terms of the sales cycle, right? And so you only have so much time in the day to focus on clients and customer acquisition, right? And so where we talked about segmentation, we talked about the cycle, in terms of actually, where you spend your time and marketing dollars and your focus, how do you think through that?
I just want to add one thing to that as we answer that question. One of the key things I learned early on was it's all about the buyer's journey, not the seller's journey. When my employees put in Salesforce that the contract was sent or the proposal was sent, does that mean that the prospect requested the contract, requested the proposal? So we changed our entire process around what is the prospect asking us to do, and that carries way more weight for me when I look at our pipeline and I say this company requested a contract and they are looking to make a decision in the next 90 days. That's the pipeline work we're going to do.
That's a cool idea. I like that.
Oh, it's made a huge difference.
I've never seen anybody do that before. I like that.
I highly recommend it. Basically, salespeople, by nature, we're optimistic. Every deal is going to close. We don't want to close the deals lost, but when you start thinking differently about your pipeline, you'll see significant returns.
You guys ever heard the term grin fucked? Does anybody know what this term means? Don't get grin fucked. Beep. Am I not allowed to say that? All right. Yeah, what that means is people telling you all the things you want to hear, to his point, that play into your optimism, and the deal never closes. So try and avoid that.
Outside of a fast yes, which is what everyone's shooting for, like a fast no is almost as good sometimes because it clears the crap out of your pipeline. It lets you focus on the things that matter. And so looking at what your pipeline velocity is to get deals to whatever that next incremental stage is, whether that's close won, close lost, or even different stages within the sales cycle is something to really pay attention to.
Yeah, I think one thing that we've started to focus a lot more on is filling the top of our sales funnel. So this year is the first year we've had a sales development rep doing cold calling, cold emailing, and he's doing a fantastic job, and he is building our pipeline really well, and which is exciting, and sometimes it was a little bit surprising to me. Actually, I was like, oh wow, these people actually are responding to this. It's pretty cool to see that top of the sales funnel grow. And the reason why is because if you've got a really long sales cycle, like 9 months, then you're not praying for that next deal to close. It's just a numbers game. So if you've got enough at that top of the sales funnel, you've got enough qualified opportunities, it's just a matter of time when they're going to drop and fall into closed won. So it's more like now we're starting to play the numbers game. We're 4 years into the journey, so what it was at the start, that was very different, which is more about praying, and I think everyone prays for the first 2 or 3 years of their company, but still do probably. But I think now we're at a point where it's much more of that numbers game.
Yeah, and then you can effectively model a customer acquisition cost, and as soon as you can do that, then people want to write you bigger checks, right?
That's right, exactly.
So as you get traction, you're getting clients, you're getting customers, do you start tracking KPIs? How are you putting metrics? How are you trying to get better? And as you think about that, Jeff, you want to start us off? I keep picking on you. Maybe, Kevin, you're up.
Yeah, for us, the one thing I would say is we track everything, but we try to focus on a few things because there are things that are more impactful, and the other side of it is you can't really pay attention to everything. But the way we look at it is you do the right inputs at the top of the funnel at each stage, and then it is that numbers game. So we look at things down to the activity level, but most importantly, we look at demo set or conversation started, qualified opportunities. And if you're doing those and then you're doing the nuts and bolts sales things that are just very typical of almost any sales process or pipeline, eventually those are going to move along and get you to close business.
The biggest thing that I've learned is, you can figure out different metrics to track, that's fine. One of the points of discipline that we instill is forcing our AEs, our sales reps, to do every management presentation from the CRM system, okay? So your typical sort of sales reporting methodology and cadence, the way that I've seen it happen at every other company I've ever been at, no matter how big you are, is effectively that somebody takes all of this data out of the CRM, then they mangle it, they turn it into spreadsheets that are, sanitized for management approval, and then everybody sits and they look at these spreadsheets that maybe then get put onto a PowerPoint presentation, right? What we now do is we say no more spreadsheets. We are not going to burn those calories. We're not going to waste that effort in terms of trying to make all those things happen. We are going to force every one of our salespeople to go through every single metric in terms of how it's being tracked inside of our instance of Salesforce. And when we do that, then all of a sudden, every time that something's wrong and the guy goes, oh no, that's wrong in Salesforce, then we can force them to say, well, why didn't you fix it? Why didn't you track that meeting? Why didn't you track that phone call? All of those sorts of things. And so when we drive the entire review and sort of sales examination process from that single primary point of truth, then all of a sudden all the lies that we tell ourselves kind of go away because we're forcing everybody to truly update that system.
Something
it's not in the CRM, it never happened. That's the rule of our company. If it's not there, it never happened. You never made the calls, you never sent the emails, never sent the contract.
When we were in our early stages, we didn't want to spend the money on Salesforce because it's like $65 a person a month or something crazy like that, which is a lot of money to those of us who are really poor. And so what we started was with tracking in Excel, and then we moved to HubSpot. And what we learned at the beginning of the year is that those were just not at all sufficient for getting the metrics that we needed. But what was important is that we actually did keep those numbers. We actually did keep the Excel document and HubSpot, and now that we can afford Salesforce, it's so much better. But we can go back and say, okay, what did Brock do, our one sales guy do last year? And we looked at that in the first 3 months last year, he was able to bring in 40 leads. And then this year, with our Series A, we hired the sales development rep and 3 new salespeople. And they brought in 200, that group brought in 200 leads in the first 3 months. And so we could go back to our board and say, look what we did with your money. And if we hadn't been tracking that in Excel, we would never be able to do that. And so for those of you who are on the earlier stages of your business, I would really encourage you to think of some hacks that, even though if you can't afford the really great tools that enable you to track the sales piece, to do it manually or to make sure you are tracking it so that, today it may not be as helpful, but next year or the year after it might be.
That's a great segue. So when thinking about your sales team, right, they're the lifeline of the organization. How are you building successful sales teams? How are you finding them?
Sure. First of all, it has to be a fun place. And I think a sales contest and things like that, recognition publicly in front of their peers, in front of the company. But as far as like building the best sales team, what I've learned is that Chicago is such a great community where everybody actually wants to help each other. So what I like to do is I like to go out at least once every, call it 2 or 3 weeks, with another VP of sales in the area and ask the question of him or her, tell me about the best people you've ever hired on your sales team that are no longer on your team today, and can you introduce me to them? And by building that network over a period of the last 6 or 7 years, I feel like we have a great pipeline of phenomenal salespeople that have come through the doors. I see one over there who's now at Zenefits. But it's all about networking and tracking the best candidates.
For us, we've been fortunate to be participate in things like this or with the ITA, with Built in Chicago. And so we get a pretty good amount of inbound candidates. But then on our end, we also have an internal recruiter that reaches out proactively to try to find people that are going to fit that experience that we're looking for. And then, there's really no secret sauce past that we found, other than you go through a ton of interviews. You try to identify what that ideal candidate profile that you're looking for, and really just grind through a lot of interviews, a lot of conversations, and narrow that pipe down as much as you can. You try to be efficient about it, but it really just takes a ton of work to find good people.
Yeah, I think that sometimes it's actually easier to get the ingest of candidates. And then the harder part is salespeople are really good at selling themselves. And so getting to really if this person's the right fit or are they going to really do what they say they're going to do is really hard. So something that we started to do in our interview process has been giving them a case study of Knowledge Hound. And no matter what level they're coming in at Knowledge Hound, they have to sell us Knowledge Hound. And so we watch how they interact in kind of an uncomfortable situation. And we're not there to quiz them on how much they know about our product, but rather see how they handle objections and handle, someone who wants to get a discount or put it off till next fiscal year. And so that's been really interesting on how we get through the ingest of a lot of different candidates that come to us. But most of our hires have actually been through our network. And I think that helps when you're hiring salespeople because that network does say, like, this has been a really good salesperson here at this other company. And that helps weed through a bit of the salesperson selling to you.
We've done the same thing where we have them come in and pitch to us. That's one of the last things that they do where you give them the opportunity to prep. You know they're not going to have all of the information, and you let them know that there's not an expectation that they're going to know your business inside and out. But what you can see is, do they have some of those core skill sets, and how do they approach certain situations, and can they do what they say they can do? Because to your point, salespeople know, generally speaking, even decent ones know how to talk, and they can make stuff up on the fly. But when you're kind of quizzing them on things that you know better than they do, so they don't have the opportunity to really BS as much as they would if they're talking about the topic of their choice.
They know how to talk, but the ultimate truth is when you ask them for their W-2 from the prior year, or give me the performance of your team spreadsheet and show me where you rank. When someone says I was the number two salesperson in the company, make sure you ask how many salespeople are there, because it might be two.
Yeah.
We had that happen,
and
actually.
I think there's some truth to that. I'm actually oftentimes wary about using past performance as a key indicator because things like territories, the variances of what happens, did some client buy from them just because they happen to take an order? So I'm a little bit wary of using that. I think it's a good indicator. The thing that I focus a lot more on is how do they execute on the process of trying to sell me to hire them. So one of the things that I am brutal in, like, interview number one with a salesperson, when they walk through the door, of do they know who I am? And not from like an ego perspective, like, do you know who I am? But have they researched me in LinkedIn? Do they know what my background is? Have they found a point of commonality? Do they know the history of my company? They may not know what we do as well as I do, but they damn sure ought to know when we were founded, what the name of our CEO is, and what my last two professional positions were, right? The fact that I'm a Cubs fan, blah, 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 blah. It takes 2 minutes of Googling to have a pretty good idea of who I am. And if that person walks in the door and they're trying to fly by night and kind of BS me, and they haven't done the preparation before they walked in, that's the big thing that I'm trying to usually screen for, is did they effectively prepare for this meeting, or did they just walk in and think that they can wing it? Because if they're the latter type of person, I don't want them in my sales organization.
And actually that goes for us trying to get clients, right, and customers, having all the information because we have so much information at our fingertips and being able to utilize that. When you think about, your industry and, kind of over the course of time, how has it evolved over the course of your career? I know that, Jeff, I've known you for a while, serial entrepreneur, lots of different, organizations. How has this evolved for you guys over the course of your career?
I would just share that the buyers are very educated, and they know way more than I think they know by the time I show up at their doorstep. And when I first started at UrbanBound, we were the first company to ever build relocation management software. So very little was ever asked of us. But since then, there's been 3 or 4 competitors that have popped up, and now they're asking me questions like, how do you integrate with our HRMS software? And how do you do move estimates? The buyers are now understanding that this is one of the industries which is so archaic and there hasn't been technology, and they know what they're looking for versus 2010, 2011. We were an easier buy for anybody.
Not only are they more educated, they have higher expectations. So, 4 years ago, we were educating them on everything, trying to build that urgency and explain to them what our value prop is. Now that's transitioned where they pretty much get that across the board, that it's important to their organization, and they're really looking at how it's going to fit into their workflow, how they're going to be able to staff it, how easy it's going to make their life. But they do come in knowing a lot more than they did even, I mean, it really changes every probably quarter. So even 6 months ago, they weren't as educated. And that applies to the bigger the deal. Generally speaking, the more research they've done, at least that's what we found.
I'm going to answer it in a little different way, but the things that have changed for us in our sales process, rather than the people that we're selling to over the past 4 years, has been that we did a lot of acquiring clients through my network. So it was, how can we game Christy's LinkedIn profile, was essentially the first 2 years. And now we're in a phase of the company where we are trying to scale it, because obviously my LinkedIn network is not going to scale. It's a great place to start. But now that we're in a scale mode, it's how do you create those marketing email campaigns that sound like a real person, that are genuine, that show that you have a product and that's amazing and that you believe in it, and that actually gets them to answer. And so that's really, we're in this phase of how do you scale, and that's how we've changed, less so the market's changed, but that's how we've changed over the past 4 years.
For us, the biggest evolution of the market, so we're a 10-year-old company roughly, and the biggest evolution of the market is the fact that there now is a market. When you're an entrepreneur and you're starting off and you generally get fixated on this concept and this idea, one of the screening criteria that I always like to use as I'm thinking through companies I might invest in or I might work for is, do customers have a budget for this thing that you're building? No matter how great it is, does somebody have a line item for it? Is there an actual market for it? Or are you constantly trying to go in and convince somebody, hey, I know you don't have budget for this thing, but it could be really, really valuable to you. For a long time, Spring was in that camp. It was us going into people and saying, hey, I know you don't really have budget for cloud-based, digital document automation and workflow, blah, 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 blah. However, we really think you should write us a check because we think you'll be really happy and you'll love it and there'll be all these, great benefits that come out of it. And what has now evolved dramatically over the last few years for us as we've really started to hit our stride is that we found these use cases that somebody wakes up and says, oh, I need a way to automate my contract process so that I can get contracts out faster to accelerate my revenue cycle. So the customer is thinking that. They're thinking, I need this solution. And then they go out and they say, who can provide this solution for me? Who are the different players in the market, et cetera, et cetera. And then all we have to do, we don't have to convince them that they ought to buy a widget of some sort. We just have to convince them that our widget is the best, it's the most cost effective, it will make them more successful than our competitors' widgets that are out there. And so as you're thinking about markets to attack, being in a market before it's a market and trying to convince all of your clients and your prospects that they should buy something and then that they should buy you dramatically elongates that sales cycle and can make it really, really hard.
It kind of goes along with what Christy said about educating your clients, right?
Absolutely.
It's all about educating them, because if you educate them on what it is that you're selling, then chances are they're going to end up buying from you, especially if they like you, and you're pretty likable. So,
thanks, Brad.
So Christy, in terms of success, we only have a few more minutes left. So how do you define success?
So for
pretty generic question, so sorry.
Well, besides revenue, at the end of the day, it's all about revenue for us. So that's obviously success. But for the sales team, I define it, I have 4 metrics that I look at, and I look at the % conversion from lead to qualified opportunity. And the second metric is the average time it takes to go from lead to opportunity. The third metric is the % of opportunities that go to closed won. And then the fourth metric is average time that it takes to go from opportunity to close won. And if I can optimize those 4 metrics, that's success for me. So what I want to see is the percentages increase and the average time decrease. And that's what every one-on-one with my sales team is exactly that. I go, how many leads? What's your percentage this month that you converted? What was the average time? And we're constantly talking about how can we increase that percentage and decrease that time, because that gets us to revenue faster. And for a company our size, it's all about cash. So we're always living till like the next 12 months of, trying to push our runway out as far as possible. So that's what success looks like for us.
Hopefully it's not just maybe a Midwest thing, but if anyone says it's not revenue or that's not one of the top couple, that might be scary. That's what we measure success on. I mean, we need, everything else is great and we want to build a fantastic company, add a ton of value, but if you don't have any revenue, eventually you're not going to be able to do that. Beyond that, we look at all the things that lead up to that. So filling the top of the funnel with solid inbound leads. Over 80% of our revenue, our closed revenue over the past 4 years has been from inbound leads. So that's huge for us, and it's led to a lot of success. And then outside of that, but along the same lines, is building that top of the funnel and progressing them to each stage. So the conversion rate, the number of qualified marketing leads, the number of qualified sales opportunities, and then those progressing through the funnel.
See, all my board cares about is revenue. However, my employees, they don't. So we really look at not like what is the average revenue per employee that relocated for Pixar in the last year. We look at how many people did we help move. And we can rally around that, and there's a purpose behind that. If we can say last month we moved 2,500 people, that's exciting. That's what our engineers want to build product for, versus last month we did X million dollars in revenue. So those are the little shifts in the business I learned over the years, because I used to only talk about revenue, lifetime value of a customer, what's going on with their churn. And what I learned was the purpose is really who are you helping and how are you helping them.
Yeah, I would echo that. For me as an entrepreneur, oftentimes success is making payroll. I don't know if you guys are ever in that situation, but any month I could keep the lights on and move on to the next month was successful in a lot of ways. As we got the opportunities to evolve, it sort of became a lot more around having value metrics for value that we provided to our clients, which is going to hopefully be exponentially greater than your revenue. And so it starts to feel more impressive, more impactful, really gets back to the purpose of why you exist as an organization. And then as you get sort of to where Spring is now, we almost get this luxury of defining success as, are we building in a way that's scalable? Are we building in a way that's going to take us to 100 million of revenue? And are we fundamentally going to be able to operationalize this out to $1 billion of revenue in a way that's then going to be able to transform the ecosystem? And so success sort of evolves as the company evolves, hopefully. But becoming more and more ambitious about that early on is something that I would encourage you to think about.
So final question for the audience here, advice that you would give to other entrepreneurs out there building a business, B2B acquisition, just any sort of thoughts. Kevin, you want to start us off?
Yeah, as far as, on the sales side and especially early on, it's follow up and don't overpromise unless you can make sure you can deliver on that. Really short, Chris, who's sitting in the audience, my CEO, he used to tell me how terrible I was at sales, but I was really, really good at following up. And sometimes that it's not following up once, twice, 3 times. It's 7, 8, 9, 10. And eventually you're going to get that person on the phone. You're going to get a response. And this is much more applicable early on, but don't give up on those things, because it really does turn into a lot of business that you otherwise might have lost out on.
A relentless honey badger.
Wow. Spirit animal.
See, there is our answer. Gosh, I should have stuck with that question, man.
That's hard to follow up on. So I would say I think it is a lot about grit. I think when you show passion for the product that you're selling, people can really hear that in your voice, and they can feel that coming from you. And so when it doesn't feel salesy when you're that passionate about your product. So early on, I would encourage the founders and the people who have the most passion for the product to either be along on the sales call or to be the salesperson, because I think people can feel how genuine you are about how much you believe that this product will impact their life. And I'm going to do one shameless plug. We are hiring for a VP of sales, so check us out.
That's not shameless. That's smart.
I'll say 2 things. One is I'm a huge sports fan, and the best teams, what they probably hide in the locker room is their playbook. To scale a company, even when you only have 2 or 3 employees, and you land that sales superstar and he or she leaves, and all the knowledge is left behind or goes with him or her, documenting everything. What were their objections to this question? What questions did they ask? How do they approach a prospect in a meeting? And then you can hand that playbook on to somebody else, and it's organic over time. That's something that we constantly look at as our playbook, and we keep updating it.
Yeah, so just to add, besides reading Crossing the Chasm, hint, hint, the other thing that I would say is, what I always tell my teams is if you think of a meeting, people put like 100% of the focus on the actual meeting. How'd the meeting go? Did the meeting go well, et cetera, et cetera. If you think of 40% of the value of a meeting being the preparation and 40% of the value being the follow-up, and if you put twice as much time into the prep and twice as much time into the follow-up as you actually put into that meeting, you will end up getting orders of magnitude more value and more leverage out of that time that you actually spend in that meeting.
Brad, I realized I can't get off the stage because I said 2 things, I only said 1. Sorry. Second thing, go on a listening tour. Talk to your clients. Ask them, why are they buying your product or service? On a scale of 1 to 10, how are you doing? What could you be doing better? Ask them for ideas. Make them feel like an insider on your company. And then as you release new things, make it their idea, and they'll stick with you forever.
This has been really, really informative. You guys are, again, rockstar panel. Everyone give me a round of applause. Thank you guys.